Frank Delaney hadn't slept through the night in over 4 years. At 76, he told himself it was normal. Justice antagonists UST part of aging, he would mutter, pulling a threadbare blanket over his chest at 2:47 a.m. for the fifth night in a row. But somewhere deep down, he knew it wasn't normal. Not really. What was normal about lying awake for hours listening to the hum of his refrigerator, watching the red digits on his alarm clock shift like a countdown to nothing? He'd doze off at 11:30, then wake at 1:04, heart racing, throat dry, drenched in a vague sweat that wasn't from nightmares. Just this weird, persistent anxiety that followed him into sleep like a shadow. Frank had never been a warrior, not even when his wife died 6 years ago. Back then, people said, "Stay strong for the kids," even though the kids were in their 40s and barely called. They all lived out of state, Boston, Denver, San Diego. They sent birthday cards and Amazon gift boxes, but no one asked if he was sleeping. No one knew he wasn't, not even his doctor. Frank didn't want to be one of those old men who made his aches the centerpiece of every conversation, and insomnia felt trivial, like a luxury complaint. But it wasn't. It was war. Every night he'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning in slow, useless circles. Some nights he'd shuffle down to the kitchen and drink warm milk, just like his mother used to make. Other nights he'd turn on the television and let reruns of old sitcoms fill the silence. But nothing worked for long. His brain wouldn't shut off. It didn't race like when you're young and anxious. It just hummed. Low, dull, constant thoughts. What day is it? Did I forget to check the mail? Why haven't I heard from Megan lately? Is this what dying feels like? Slow, invisible decay? Frank never said these things aloud. He just lived them. Night after night, day after groggy day, his body was giving him signs, but he was too polite to listen. He'd started dozing off in the middle of crossword puzzles. Once he fell asleep while waiting for toast. The smoke alarm woke him up. Another time, he couldn't remember his neighbor's name, someone he'd talked to every week for 20 years. His eyes were dry all the time. He drank too much coffee trying to compensate, and then couldn't nap even if he wanted to. He read articles online that said, seniors naturally need less sleep, but then others said, less sleep shortens life expectancy. Which one was it? Was he dying slowly because he wasn't sleeping? Or was he not sleeping because he was already slowly dying? It felt like a cruel trick. And the worst part, he felt embarrassed by it, as if struggling to sleep made him weak, less manly, less capable. Once he tried to mention it to a friend at the senior center, just offhandedly. "Do you sleep okay these days?" he asked, and the guy laughed and said, "I sleep like a rock, man. 8 hours easy." Frank smiled, nodded, and never brought it up again. He didn't want to seem fragile. Not now. Not when every year felt like another test of his independence. People treated seniors differently once they sensed decline. One sign of frailty, and they started offering help you didn't ask for. Or worse, making decisions for you. Frank didn't want to be managed. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to sleep. It started affecting more than just his nights. His days became cloudy, like walking through fog. He couldn't focus. Reading took longer. Cooking took more energy than it should have. He forgot appointments. He drove slower. Once, he almost ran a red light because his brain just didn't register the color in time. That scared him. But even then, he didn't tell anyone. He started lying during his checkups. "Any trouble sleeping?" "Nope," he'd say. "Just the usual tossing and turning." He told himself it wasn't a real lie. Everyone tossed and turned. But the truth was he hadn't felt truly rested in over 1,400 days. And the toll it took wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Loneliness feels heavier at 3 a.m. when there's no one around to say try counting sheep, or rub your back, or even just exist in the next room. Frank hadn't heard another human voice in his house in weeks. The silence used to feel peaceful. Now it felt permanent, like a prelude to death, like his body was already preparing for the quiet. He started Googling things at night. How many hours should a 76-year-old sleep? Is 4 hours enough? Dementia and sleep deprivation in seniors. The answers terrified him. Studies said 6 to 8 hours were ideal. Less than 5. Increased risk of Alzheimer's, shorter lifespan, cognitive decline, heart disease. The warnings were everywhere. And yet, no one talked about it. Sleep, he realized, was the hidden crisis of aging. Everyone discussed cholesterol and mobility and memory, but sleep? That was just an unfortunate side effect. Except it wasn't. It was foundational. And his was breaking. He tried melatonin. Didn't help. Tried lavender. Oil, nothing. Bought a weighted blanket. Gave him night sweats. He tried warm baths, breathing exercises, even YouTube videos with ocean waves. But every night ended the same. With him, awake, staring at the ceiling fan, heart quietly aching. Not from pain, but from a kind of slow emotional erosion. The sense that he was vanishing, one sleepless hour at a time. One day he called his daughter, not because he wanted to talk about it, but because he just needed to hear someone. She was busy, of course. Had to jump off in 10 minutes. She asked, "Are you okay, Dad?" He hesitated, then said, "I'm just tired." She laughed. "Aren't we all?" He didn't explain. Just said goodnight and hung up. That night he didn't even try to sleep. Just sat in his chair, staring out the window, watching the moon drift behind clouds. He wasn't sure if he was dying, but he was sure he wasn't really living. Not like this. Not in this half state between exhaustion and anxiety, between memory and fog. Something had to change. Not for the sake of living longer, but for the sake of truly being alive. And somewhere in the distance of his tired brain, he made a promise. If there's still time left, he wouldn't spend it awake and alone. He would figure this out, somehow. He had to. The night everything shifted didn't begin with a dramatic moment. It started with a commercial. A soft-spoken narrator over gentle piano music, selling some memory supplement at 2:14 in the morning. Frank wasn't watching, not really. He was sitting in his recliner, holding a lukewarm cup of tea he forgot he made, eyes glazed toward the flickering television that had become his nighttime companion. But then, one line pierced through his fog like a whisper meant only for him. Sleep isn't what you lose as you age. It's what keeps you from aging. Frank sat upright. For some reason, that line echoed louder than anything he'd heard in weeks. He rewound it, played it again, then again. It wasn't about the product. It was about the truth hiding in those 12 words. All this time, he thought sleep was just something you accepted losing, like hair or hearing or birthdays that mattered. But what if sleep wasn't a symptom of age? What if it was a weapon against it? That thought unsettled him. Not because it was scary, but because it made sense in a way nothing else had lately. He sat there for another hour, that sentence repeating in his head. Sleep is what keeps you from aging. The next morning, Frank did something he hadn't done in a while. He looked in the mirror for longer than a glance. His eyes looked tired, sure, but behind them, there was still something alive, something tired of fading quietly. He pulled out an old leather notebook from his drawer, the one his wife used to keep grocery lists in, and wrote 5 words. "I want to sleep again." It felt silly, but real. It was a confession and a challenge in the same breath. Later that afternoon, he Googled how seniors can improve sleep naturally. He read article after article, things he had seen before but dismissed. But now they felt different. They weren't tips. They were lifelines. No screens before bed, gentle lighting, consistent sleep schedule, warm baths, meditation, daily walks, a gratitude journal. None of it sounded impossible. It just sounded intentional. That night, Frank didn't turn the TV on. He made a cup of chamomile tea and drank it at the dining table instead of the recliner. He turned off the lights one by one. He opened his bedroom window, just a crack, to let in fresh air like his wife used to. And then, for the first time in years, he sat down with a pen and wrote, "Today, I'm thankful I heard that line." It wasn't poetry. It wasn't even deep. But it was a start, the first page of something that might not be a story about decay, but maybe, just maybe, a story about return. That night, he only slept 5.5 hours. But when he woke up, he didn't feel angry. He felt possible. The next day, he walked around the block. No phone, no earbuds, just fresh morning air and the sound of birds he'd forgotten still lived in his neighborhood. That evening, he called his daughter again. This time, when she asked, "How are you?" he paused, then said honestly, "I haven't been okay, but I want to be." There was silence. Then she said, "Do you want to talk before bed? I could call around 9?" Frank nodded even though she couldn't see him. "Yeah," he said, "that'd be nice." When she called that night, they didn't talk long, just a few minutes. But for some reason, after hanging up, Frank felt lighter, like someone had turned the emotional volume down in his brain. He slept 6 hours that night. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Over the next week, he added small things. No caffeine after 3 p.m. A short evening walk. He downloaded a white noise app that sounded like rainfall. He moved his clock out of direct view so he wouldn't obsess over the numbers. Some nights were harder than others. Sometimes he still woke at 2 or 3 a.m., but he stopped panicking. Instead, he'd write in his notebook. Simple things. "The daffodils on my neighbor's lawn bloomed today." Or, "I remembered Mom's pecan pie recipe." It wasn't about productivity, it was about presence. And somehow, over days and then weeks, presence became peace. Peace became rest. And rest, real, deep, healing rest, became possible again. He wasn't just chasing sleep anymore. He was chasing himself. And bit by bit, he was catching up. Frank didn't wake up one morning, magically cured. There was no dramatic breakthrough or sudden shift where his life turned from gray to gold. What happened instead was something more powerful, something real: consistency. Every day he committed to small habits, and every day those habits pushed him 1 inch closer to who he used to be, or maybe to someone he'd never had the chance to become. By week 3, Frank was averaging close to 6.5 hours of sleep. For the first time in nearly 5 years, he experienced what it felt like to wake up without a headache, without a fog wrapped around his brain, without his heart feeling like it was dragging behind him. He began to notice things again: the smell of the neighbor's lawn being mowed, the way sunlight poured into his living room around 9:10 a.m., and even the soft joy of folding warm laundry straight from the dryer. Sleep wasn't just helping his body, it was returning color to a life that had turned beige. He started reading again, really reading, not just scanning headlines, but getting lost in chapters. He finished a mystery novel for the first time in years and wrote down the last line in his journal because it felt poetic. His daughter noticed it too. "You sound different on the phone," she said one night. "More like yourself." Frank smiled. "That's because I'm sleeping like a human again." They both laughed. She offered to come visit that weekend. "I'll bring the grandkids. They haven't seen you in a while." For a split second, Frank felt a flicker of anxiety. Would they find him old, frail? Would they be bored with him? But then he shook it off. He was ready. When they arrived that Saturday, he met them at the door, dressed, clean-shaven, holding 2 mugs of warm cider. The grandkids hugged him tighter than he expected. They talked, laughed, played cards. Frank told them stories, not the usual rehearsed grandpa stuff, but actual stories from his childhood, from his teaching years, from moments that mattered. And later that evening, after the house was quiet and the kids were asleep, he and his daughter sat on the back porch under a sky bursting with stars. "I'm proud of you," she said. He looked over, puzzled. "For what?" She shrugged. "For not giving up, for doing something about it." Frank didn't know what to say, so he just nodded, fighting back tears. That night he slept 8 full hours. The kind of sleep that doesn't just rest your body, it forgives it. And in the morning he didn't check his clock. He didn't care. He felt rested, and that was all that mattered. He started volunteering at the library twice a week, helping other seniors learn how to use e-readers, which was ironic given how long he resisted technology himself. But now he found joy in guiding others, especially those who whispered the same words he used to think alone. "I haven't been sleeping." He didn't give advice like a guru. He just shared what worked for him. "Start small," he'd say, "and forgive yourself when it doesn't work the first night." Or the 5th over time, Frank stopped being the man who couldn't sleep. He became something else. A man who chose to rest, not just at night, but in life. He began protecting his peace like it was the last valuable thing he had. And maybe it was. His phone started ringing more often, not just from family but friends who hadn't heard from him in a while. Some he called back, some he didn't. He was learning to say no, to put himself first. He wasn't chasing longevity anymore. He was chasing presence. And strangely, presence seemed to stretch time. One night, as he sat by the fireplace with a book in hand and soft rain tapping the windows, he wrote in his journal, "This is what living feels like. Not loud, not flashy, but still." And somehow, that stillness was louder than anything he'd felt in years. Frank didn't keep track of the exact day his life felt normal again. There was no calendar, circle, or marked milestone. It just happened. One day he realized he hadn't thought about sleep in days. That used to be all he thought about. When he'd get it, why he couldn't, what he'd do if he never did again. Now, it was just a quiet part of his life, like brushing his teeth or turning off lights at night. It wasn't perfect every day. Some nights he still woke at 3 a.m. But he didn't panic. He had learned how to breathe through the quiet, to trust that rest would return. One morning while making eggs, he paused and smiled at the sizzling sound in the pan. It reminded him of Sunday mornings with his wife, before the noise of life became static, before sleep became a luxury. That day he did something he hadn't done in years. He took a photo of himself in the mirror. Not to post, just to remember. Because for the first time in a long, long time, he liked the man looking back. Wrinkled, sure, but steady, present. Frank continued his routine. Mornings with tea, walks, music, sometimes just sitting on a bench watching the world exist. He stopped trying to make life exciting. He focused on making it meaningful. His daughter noticed. She visited more. The grandkids loved his sleepy stories, his weird little routines, his Zen grandpa vibes. One evening, as they sat watching the sun fall behind the hills, one of the kids asked, "Grandpa, how come you don't get tired like Mom?" Frank chuckled. "Oh, I used to," he said, "but now I let life come to me instead of chasing it." That night, he wrote just one line in his journal. "Sleep gave me back my life." He decided to donate to a local nonprofit working with seniors facing sleep and anxiety issues. He told them, no one should feel like they're fading alone. They asked if he'd share his story. He said, "Only if I can tell it my way." And he did, not as a lesson, but as a reminder that peace is not a destination, it's a decision. And sleep? Sleep is not weakness. It's not laziness. It's not a sign that you've given up. It's proof you're still trying, still healing, still here. And Frank? He was still here, living, breathing, resting, existing not as a man waiting for the end, but as one who had finally learned how to begin again, one night at a time.